Chapter 1. The Question in the Dark. The rain came down like a punishment. Eleanor Ashford pressed herself against the crumbling stone wall of the church, her daughter shivering in her arms. 6 years old, and Clara had already learned that the world was not kind to women with nowhere to go. The candlelight from inside the sanctuary flickered through stained glass, crimson and gold, saints with accusing eyes. "Mama, I'm cold." "I know, darling." Just a moment. But there was no moment. There was only the rain and the darkness and the knowledge that her husband's family would find them eventually. The Ashfords did not forgive scandal. They did not forgive a daughter-in-law who discovered their eldest son preferred his mistress to his wife, who dared to leave with the child and whatever dignity remained. Eleanor pulled her cloak tighter around Clara. The village of Blackmore was 3 miles behind them now, its tavern doors closed to a woman traveling alone at night. Ahead lay only the Thornwood estate, abandoned for a century, its windows dark as empty eye sockets. "We'll shelter in the manor," Eleanor whispered, though her voice shook. "Just for tonight." Clara looked up at her, rain-soaked curls plastered to her pale cheeks. "The haunted one? There's no such thing as ghosts." Eleanor had stopped believing in ghosts the day she'd realized living men could be far more monstrous. They stumbled through the wrought iron gates, rusted hinges screaming protest. The estate rose before them like something from a fever dream. Gothic spires clawing at the storm clouds, ivy strangling the stone facade, gardens gone wild with thorns. Eleanor's boots squelched through mud as she half-carried Clara up the front steps. The door was unlocked. That should have been the first warning. Inside, the air was still and cold, heavy with the scent of old wood and something else. Something metallic, like copper left too long in water. Eleanor set Clara down gently, her hands trembling as she fumbled for the matches in her pocket. 1 spark, 2. The third caught, and she lit the stub of candle she'd stolen from the church. The foyer materialized around them, a grand staircase spiraling into shadow, portraits with faces too worn to distinguish, floors of black marble veined with white like bone. "Stay close," Eleanor murmured. They moved deeper into the manor, seeking a room with a door that locked, with walls that might keep the storm and her husband's family at bay. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. The candlelight carved dancing monsters from the furniture draped in white sheets, and every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps. Then Clara stopped. "Mama, there's someone here." Eleanor's blood turned to ice. She yanked Clara behind her, holding the candle high like a weapon. "Who's there?" Silence. Then, from the shadows at the top of the stairs, a voice, low, measured, and utterly devoid of warmth. "You're trespassing." A figure stepped into the light. He was tall, impossibly so, dressed in black that seemed to drink the candlelight. His face was pale as bone, angular and sharp, with eyes the color of old silver or new steel. Dark hair fell past his collar, and when he moved, it was with the kind of grace that suggested violence held on a very short leash. Eleanor's breath caught. She'd seen dangerous men before, her father-in-law, the constable who'd turned her away. But this man, if he was a man, radiated something else entirely. Predatory stillness. The calm before the throat is torn out. "We'll leave," Eleanor said quickly, pulling Clara toward the door. "We didn't know anyone lived here. It's raining." She froze. The voice was softer now, almost hesitant. Eleanor turned slowly. The man hadn't moved, but his silver eyes were fixed on Clara with an expression she couldn't read. Not hunger, not cruelty, something closer to confusion. Clara, heedless of danger as only children could be, stepped out from behind Eleanor's skirts. "Why is everyone scared of you?" she asked. The silence that followed was absolute. Eleanor's heart stopped. She grabbed for Clara, apologies already forming on her lips, but the man raised one pale hand, a gesture that said, "Wait." His gaze never left the child. Then, impossibly, his mouth curved. It was not a smile, not quite. More like someone remembering what a smile was supposed to look like, muscles moving through long-forgotten motions. But there was something in it. Something raw and startled and almost human. Because, he said quietly, I am something they should fear. Clara tilted her head, considering this with the seriousness of youth. Are you a monster? Clara? Eleanor hissed, but the man shook his head. Yes, he said. I suppose I am. Oh, Clara frowned. You don't look like a monster. You look sad, the not-quite smile faltered. The man stared at the child as though she'd spoken in a language he'd forgotten, one that reached past bone-deep cold into something tender and long-buried. Eleanor watched his throat work, watched his hands, pale, long-fingered, unnaturally still, curl into fists at his sides. You should leave, he said finally. But there was no force behind it. This place is not safe. Neither is the storm, Eleanor heard herself say. Neither is the road. She swallowed her fear, forced herself to meet those silver eyes. We need shelter. Just for tonight. We won't disturb you. We won't. You already have. The words were barely a whisper, but they carried the weight of centuries. The man turned away, and for a moment Eleanor thought he would disappear back into the shadows, leaving them to the storm. Instead, he paused at the top of the stairs, his silhouette knife-sharp against the darkness. There are rooms on the second floor, he said without looking back. East wing. The doors still lock. Take what you need. Thank you, Eleanor breathed. He said nothing. But as he vanished into the upper halls, Eleanor could have sworn she heard him murmur something under his breath. Something that sounded like how strange, or perhaps how long. Clara tugged at her sleeve. Mama, I like him. Eleanor pulled her daughter close, her mind reeling. The man's pallor, the way he moved, the way the shadows seemed to cling to him like old lovers. Don't wander, she whispered. Promise me, Clara, stay in our room. Don't go looking for him. But even as she said it, Eleanor knew the truth. They were already entangled with whatever haunted Thornwood estate. The question was no longer whether they would encounter him again. It was whether they would survive it. Chapter 2. The House of Silences. Eleanor did not sleep. She sat in a high-backed chair by the window of the east wing bedroom, watching the rain carve rivers down the glass. Clara lay curled beneath a moth-eaten quilt on the four-poster bed, her breathing soft and even, innocent, trusting. Eleanor's hands would not stop shaking. The room was surprisingly well kept. Dust, yes, but no rot, no collapse. Candles in silver sconces, still half full of wax. A wardrobe containing dresses decades out of fashion, the fabric miraculously intact, as though someone had preserved this place like a tomb, waiting for mourners who never came. Or perhaps keeping vigil himself. I am something they should fear. Eleanor pressed her knuckles to her mouth, fighting the hysterical laugh that threatened to escape. She'd fled one monster only to take shelter with another. But what choice did she have? The roads were watched. Her husband's family had money, influence, men willing to drag a runaway wife back to her cage. At least here, in this decaying manor with its pale, strange master, she had walls. Even if those walls came with silver eyes and that terrible, fragile almost smile. You look sad. Clara's words echoed in Eleanor's mind. Out of the mouths of babes. Wasn't that how the saying went? Children saw what adults trained themselves to ignore. And what Clara had seen in that man's face was not cruelty or hunger, but loneliness so profound it had carved him hollow. Eleanor knew that look. She'd seen it in her mirror for months. A sound jolted her from her thoughts. A door opening somewhere below. Footsteps. Too light to be human, moving through the corridors. Eleanor rose, her pulse quickening. She crept to the bedroom door and eased it open a crack. The hallway was empty, lit only by moonlight through tall windows. The rain had stopped. In the sudden quiet, she could hear it. The footsteps descending the main staircase, then fading toward the back of the house. Stay in the room, her rational mind insisted. Lock the door, keep Clara safe. But Eleanor had not survived her marriage by being obedient. She slipped into the hallway, pulling the door shut behind her. The floorboards were mercifully silent under her stockinged feet, as she followed the sound down the grand staircase, through the foyer, past rooms swallowed in shadow. The house seemed to breathe around her. Settling beams, distant drafts, the whisper of fabric that might have been curtains or might have been something else entirely. The footsteps led to a door beneath the staircase. Eleanor hesitated, her hand on the iron handle. Every instinct screamed danger, but curiosity, that fatal female vice, won out. She turned the handle. Stone steps spiraled downward into darkness. She should have stopped, should have fled back to Clara's side. Instead, Eleanor descended into the earth, one hand trailing along the damp wall, her heart a drum in her throat. The air grew colder with each step, and that metallic scent strengthened, copper and salt and something organic, like soil after rain. The stairs opened into a vast chamber. Eleanor's breath left her in a rush. It was a library. No, a sanctuary. Shelves lined every wall from floor to vaulted ceiling, crammed with books in leather bindings, their spines embossed with gold. Candles burned in candelabras scattered throughout the space, casting warm light over reading chairs, over tables piled with maps and manuscripts, over a hearth where a fire crackled despite the late hour, and in the center of it all, seated at a massive oak desk, was the man from the stairs. He looked up as she entered, and Eleanor saw his expression shift. Surprise, then something harder. Resignation, perhaps. "I told you to stay in the East Wing," he said quietly. "You told me the rooms had locks." Eleanor stepped further into the library, emboldened by the warmth, by the sheer improbability of this hidden world beneath a rotting manor. "You didn't tell me I was a prisoner." His mouth twitched. Almost a smile again, but edged with something darker. "If you were a prisoner, you would know it. Then what am I? A trespasser who asks too many questions." Eleanor crossed her arms, refusing to be cowed. Up close, in better light, she could see him more clearly. The inhuman pallor of his skin, yes, but also the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders curved inward as though bearing invisible weight. His hands resting on the desk were bare, and she noticed with a chill that they cast no shadow in the candlelight. "My daughter," Eleanor said carefully, "asked you a question tonight. You answered her honestly. Will you do the same for me?" He regarded her for a long moment, those silver eyes unreadable. Then he leaned back in his chair, gesturing to the seat across from him. "Ask." Eleanor sat, though every nerve screamed at her not to turn her back on the door. "What are you?" "A relic." "That's not an answer. It's the kindest one." He tilted his head, studying her with the intensity of a scholar examining a specimen. "But if you require taxonomy, I am what your legends call vampire, one of the undying, a creature of night and blood and broken oaths." The word hung in the air between them, impossibly heavy. Eleanor's hands clenched in her lap. She should run, scream, grab Clara and flee into the storm-washed night. But instead she heard herself ask, "How old are you?" 247 years. His voice was flat, factual. "I was made in 1778 in the last days of summer. I have not seen sunlight since. And you live here alone?" "Yes." "Why?" For the first time, something cracked in his composure. He looked away toward the fire, and the candlelight caught the sharp line of his jaw, the hollow beneath his cheekbone. Beautiful, Eleanor realized with a start. Inhumanly, dangerously beautiful. "Because," he said slowly, "I am the last of my house, the House of Thornwood, once feared from London to Vienna. We ruled the night, commanded lesser vampires, fed as we pleased." His hands curled into fists. "And then we made a mistake. We broke a covenant with a rival house. They came for us, every last member of my bloodline, burned them, staked them, left me alive as punishment." "Punishment?" Eleanor whispered. "To live alone," he said, "is to remember what you've lost. Every single night." The ache in his voice was unbearable. Eleanor found herself leaning forward, her fear subsumed by something dangerously close to empathy. "What's your name?" He blinked, as though the question surprised him. Lucian Thornwood. I'm Eleanor Ashford. The girl is Clara, my daughter. I know. At her startled look, Lucian's mouth curved again. That ghost of a smile. You called her name a dozen times on the stairs. And she's hard to forget. Because she wasn't afraid of you. Because she asked me why I was feared. Lucian's gaze returned to Eleanor, and there was something raw in it now. Something that made her pulse quicken for reasons that had nothing to do with terror. No one has asked me that in 2 centuries. They run, or they attack, or they try to bargain for their lives. But your daughter, she saw something else. She saw you, Eleanor said softly. The silence stretched, broken only by the fire's crackle. Lucian stood abruptly, turning toward the shelves, and Eleanor wondered if she'd overstepped. But when he spoke again, his voice was gentler than before. You cannot stay here, Eleanor Ashford. This house is watched. There are others. Rival houses who would destroy anyone under my roof simply to wound me further. I have nowhere else to go. Then you will die here. I'm already dead, Eleanor said, and meant it. My husband's family will see me ruined or buried. Either I hide or I run until I collapse. At least here, she swallowed. At least here, the monster is honest about what he is. Lucian turned back to her, and for the first time, she saw something like respect in his silver eyes. 1 week, he said. I will give you 1 week to rest, to plan your next move. But then you must leave, for your sake and your daughter's. He paused. Do we have an accord? Eleanor stood, extending her hand. 1 week. His fingers were cold as marble when they closed around hers. Cold, but steady. And as Eleanor left the library, climbing back toward the world of the living, she could not shake the feeling that she'd just made a bargain with far greater consequences than either of them knew. Behind her, Lucian watched her go, and pressed one pale hand to his chest, where, beneath ribs and silence, something long dormant began, impossibly to ache. Chapter 3. Lessons in Shadow. The days bled into one another, measured not by sunlight but by the rituals Eleanor created to give Clara's life structure. Lessons in the morning, reading from Lucian's vast library, arithmetic scratched on slate, meals scavenged from the surprisingly well-stocked larder, though Eleanor tried not to think about how the preserves stayed fresh in a house with no servants. Afternoon walks through the overgrown gardens, where Clara chased rabbits and Eleanor pretended not to notice the way the shadows moved wrong, too fluid, always just beyond her peripheral vision. And at night, after Clara slept, Eleanor descended to the library. She told herself it was curiosity, a need to understand the creature who'd given them sanctuary, but the truth was simpler and more damning. Lucian Thornwood was the first person in years who'd spoken to her as though her thoughts mattered. On the 3rd night, she found him bent over a map, his dark hair falling across his face. Planning a journey? Eleanor asked, settling into her now customary chair. Planning a defense. Lucian didn't look up. The House of Ravencross has been scouting the estate's borders 3 times this week. Eleanor's stomach clenched. Should we leave? Not yet. They're testing my resolve, seeing if I'll break the armistice by striking first. His finger traced a line on the map, the edge of the Thornwood lands. But if they find you here, they'll use you against me. Then tell me how to defend myself. Now he looked up, one dark eyebrow arched. You want me to teach you to fight vampires? I want to not be helpless. Something flickered in Lucian's gaze. Approval, perhaps, or the shadow of old grief. He rose, moving to a cabinet on the far wall, and withdrew a slender knife with a blade that gleamed silver in the candlelight. Vampires are strong, he said, returning to stand before her. Faster than humans, harder to kill. But we have weaknesses. Silver disrupts our healing. Hawthorn burns us. And a blade to the heart, if driven deep enough, will end us just as surely as it would end you. He held out the knife, hilt first. Eleanor took it, her fingers brushing his. The cold of his skin no longer startled her. And you're teaching me this why? Because ignorance is the fastest way to die in my world. Lucian stepped back, gesturing for her to stand. And because your daughter asked me why I was feared, I find I would prefer she, and you, live long enough to forget my answer. Eleanor rose, the knife heavy in her hand. Show me. What followed was an hour of awkward, halting instruction. Lucian moved around her like a dancer, demonstrating guards and strikes with economical precision. He never touched her, but Eleanor could feel the displaced air when he moved, the way the candlelight seemed to bend around him. Higher, he murmured when she attempted a thrust. Ribs will slow the blade. Aim for the hollow between them. Eleanor adjusted and felt his presence at her back, close enough that she could smell him, a scent like old books and winter rain. Good, he said quietly. Again. They trained until Eleanor's arm ached, until sweat dampened her collar. Finally, Lucian called a halt, and she sank into her chair, breathless. You're stronger than you look, he observed. I had to be. My husband... Eleanor cut herself off, but Lucian's gaze sharpened. Your husband hurt you. It wasn't a question. Eleanor looked away, toward the fire. Not with his fists. He was far too careful for that. But words, neglect, the slow grinding away of everything I thought I was. Yes, he hurt me. Silence. Then Lucian moved to the cabinet again, withdrawing a bottle of wine so old the label was illegible. He poured 2 glasses with hands that did not tremble, and offered one to Eleanor. I do not drink wine anymore, he said, but I remember it being a comfort. Eleanor accepted the glass, their fingers brushing again. What do you drink now? What I must. Lucian settled into his chair, cradling his own glass though he did not lift it to his lips. I feed from livestock mostly. Pigs have blood close enough to human to sustain me, and they do not beg for mercy. The casual horror of it should have repulsed her. Instead, Eleanor found herself asking, Does it hurt them? I am careful. Quick. They do not suffer. He paused. Suffering is a choice, Eleanor, even for monsters. She sipped the wine, rich and deep, tasting of blackberries and smoke. You don't seem like a monster. That, Lucian said softly, is because you have only seen me alone. The creature I become when threatened, when hungry, when the bloodlust rises. He shook his head. You would not call me sad then. You would call me damned. We're all damned, I think. Eleanor set down her glass. Some of us just hide it better. Lucian's silver gaze locked on hers, and for a moment the air between them thrummed with something Eleanor dared not name. Then footsteps pattered overhead. Clara, awake and calling for her mother. Eleanor rose quickly. I should go. Lucian's voice was rough. Before I forget how to let you. She fled up the stairs, heart pounding, wine singing in her veins. But she could feel his gaze on her back, heavy as a touch. And when she reached Clara's room, she pressed her forehead to the doorframe and tried to remember why she'd ever thought 1 week would be enough. The next morning, Eleanor found Clara in the garden, crouched beside a thorn bush. But she wasn't alone. Lucian knelt beside her, his black coat stark against the wild roses, pointing to something in the undergrowth. Clara's delighted laugh rang out, bright as bells. Eleanor froze at the edge of the path, her breath catching. You see? Lucian was saying. The rabbit has a burrow here. 3 kits born last week. Can I touch them? Clara whispered. No. Their mother would abandon them if they smelled of humans. Lucian's voice was gentler than Eleanor had ever heard it. But we can watch. Be still, and they'll come out. They waited, child and vampire, perfectly motionless in the morning shadows. And then, impossibly, a flash of brown fur, a tiny nose twitching at the burrow's entrance. Clara's gasp was pure joy. Lucian smiled. Not the ghost of a smile, not the memory of one. A real smile, soft and unguarded, crinkling the corners of his eyes. And in that moment, bathed in the garden's dappled shade, he looked almost human, almost alive. Eleanor's throat tightened. She backed away before either of them could see her, retreating into the manor's shadows. Her hands were shaking again, but this time not from fear. Dangerous, she thought. This is dangerous. Because somewhere between the library's warmth and the garden's wild beauty, between knife lessons and rabbit burrows, Eleanor had stopped seeing Lucian Thornwood as a monster. And that, she knew, was how women like her got their hearts and their throats torn out. Chapter 4. Blood and Bargains. On the 5th night, the House of Ravencross came. Eleanor woke to Clara's scream. She bolted upright, heart slamming against her ribs, and lunged for the door. The hallway was chaos, shadows moving with inhuman speed, the sound of splintering wood, a roar that rattled the windows in their frames. "Clara!" Eleanor's voice cracked as she sprinted toward her daughter's room. The door hung from its hinges. Inside, a figure loomed over Clara's bed, tall, gaunt, with eyes like coals and teeth bared in a rictus grin. The creature had one clawed hand outstretched, reaching for the child, when Eleanor slammed into it with all her weight. They hit the floor in a tangle of limbs. The vampire, because it could be nothing else, hissed, and Eleanor felt its strength like a vice around her wrist. She screamed, thrashing, and her free hand found the knife Lucian had given her, tucked into her skirts. She drove it upward. The blade found flesh beneath the ribs. The vampire shrieked and its grip loosened, just enough. Eleanor tore free and threw herself across Clara, shielding the child with her body. "Enough!" The word cracked through the room like thunder. Lucian stood in the doorway, and Eleanor barely recognized him. His eyes blazed silver white, his lips pulled back to reveal fangs that gleamed in the moonlight. The shadows around him writhed as though alive, and when he moved, it was with the fluid, terrible grace of a predator who'd shed all pretense of humanity. The wounded vampire scrambled backward. "Thornwood, we didn't know. You knew." Lucian's voice was ice and iron. "You came into my house. You threatened what is under my protection." He advanced, and the air itself seemed to recoil. "Tell Ravencross that if he wants war, I will give him annihilation. She's human. She doesn't—" Lucian seized the vampire by the throat, lifting it off its feet with one hand. "She is mine, and you will leave. Now." He hurled the creature through the window. Glass exploded outward. Eleanor heard the vampire's body hit the ground below, heard it scramble away into the night. Then silence, absolute and ringing. Lucian turned to her, and Eleanor's breath stopped. His eyes still burned. His hands were clawed, trembling, and there was blood on his mouth. Whether the other vampires or his own, she couldn't tell. He looked at her, at Clara huddled in her arms, and something in his expression crumbled. "I'm sorry," he rasped. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean... I couldn't let them." He turned and vanished into the hallway before Eleanor could speak. She found him an hour later in the library, standing before the fire with his back to the door. He'd changed his shirt, washed the blood away, but his shoulders were rigid with tension. "Is she hurt?" he asked without turning. Shaken, but unharmed. Eleanor approached slowly, as though he were a wild thing that might bolt. "She's asleep now. I gave her valerian tea. You should leave. Tonight. Take the child and run as far as you can." "No." Now he turned, and the anguish in his face was unbearable. "You saw what I am, Eleanor. What I become when I saw you defend us." Eleanor closed the distance between them, heedless of danger. "I saw you protect a child who has no claim on you, from creatures who would have killed her for sport. I killed for you." His voice broke. "I would have torn that vampire apart if it had touched her. I would have bathed this house in blood. That is what I am." "That is the monster your daughter asked about. She also said you looked sad." Eleanor reached out, her hand hovering near his. And she was right. You've been alone so long, Lucian. You've forgotten what it means to have something worth protecting. I haven't forgotten. That's the problem. His gaze dropped to her hand, then her face. Every night you come down here. Every time you speak to me as though I'm still capable of being spoken to. I remember. And it's agony, Eleanor, because I know how this ends. I know that you'll leave, or I'll fail to protect you, or you'll finally see me for what I truly am. Eleanor took his hand. His skin was cold, but his fingers closed around hers with desperate strength. She could feel the tremor running through him, centuries of loneliness cracking open like a dam. What you truly are, she said quietly, is someone who showed mercy to strangers when he had every right to cast us out. Someone who teaches a little girl about rabbits, who trains a terrified woman to defend herself, who has spent 200 years in penance for crimes I doubt were ever his to bear. You don't know. Then tell me. Eleanor stepped closer, until they were nearly touching. Tell me why you were spared. Tell me what you did. Lucian closed his eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was raw. I loved a human woman, Marianne. I wanted to make her like me, to keep her forever. But the transformation, it requires consent. True, uncoerced consent, or the turn to become mindless ghouls. He swallowed. I thought I had her consent. I was so certain. But when she woke, she screamed. She clawed at her own throat, trying to tear out what I'd made her. Eleanor's heart clenched. The House of Ravencross found out. They accused Thornwood of breaking the oldest law, no forced turnings. My family defended me, said Marianne had consented. But Ravencross didn't care. They wanted our territory, our power. So they came in the night, and they burned everyone I'd ever loved. His eyes opened, silver and swimming, and they left me alive because they knew the guilt would be worse than any death. Lucian. So you see, I am not noble. I am selfish and cursed and dangerous, and you should take your daughter and run before I destroy you too. Eleanor cupped his face in both hands, forcing him to meet her gaze. You made a mistake. A terrible one. But you've spent 2 centuries punishing yourself for it. When is enough, Lucian? When have you suffered long enough to be forgiven? I can't be forgiven. Not by Ravencross. Not by your house. Eleanor's thumb brushed his cheekbone and she felt him shudder. But maybe by yourself. Maybe by someone who sees you and doesn't flinch. Why are you doing this? He whispered. Why do you care? Because I know what it's like to be called a mistake. To be told you deserve every cruelty visited upon you. Eleanor's voice shook. My husband said I was barren, cursed, that Clara's birth was a fluke and I'd never give him the sons he deserved. He told me I was worthless except as an ornament, and I believed him, Lucian. For years I believed him. Understanding dawned in Lucian's eyes. Eleanor, but Clara asked you a question and you smiled. You smiled like someone remembering how. Eleanor's hands trembled against his skin. If you can remember, so can I. If you can protect us, I can stand beside you. And if you think I'm going to run now, when we've just barely started to fight back, you're wrong. Lucian stared at her, and Eleanor saw the moment his resolve cracked. He caught her wrists gently, his touch reverent, and leaned his forehead against hers. 1 week, you said, he murmured. I lied. His laugh was broken and bright. What do you want, Eleanor Ashford? To stay, to learn, to be something other than a victim. She pulled back just enough to meet his gaze, and maybe, if you'll let me, to remind you that you're something other than a monster. For a long moment they stood there, hands entwined, the fire crackling at their backs. Then Lucian nodded, once, sharply, as though making a covenant. Then we fight, he said. Together, Eleanor smiled. Together. And in the shadows beyond the library, unseen and unheard, the House of Ravencross watched and planned and sharpened their knives. Chapter 5. The Interlude. The next 3 days passed in a strange, breathless limbo. Lucian fortified the estate, laying wards of salt and iron at every threshold, inscribing sigils on the windows in his own blood. Eleanor watched him work with the efficiency of a general preparing for siege, and felt something fierce kindle in her chest. This was not the broken creature from the library's shadows. This was Lucian Thornwood as he must have been centuries ago. Lethal. Focused, utterly in command. But at night, when Clara slept and the wards held, he became something else again. "Tell me about the world," Eleanor said one evening, curled in her chair with a book of vampire history Lucian had lent her. "Before you were turned, what was it like?" Lucian sat across from her, a chess set spread between them. He moved a knight, his expression distant. "Smaller, slower. We measured time in seasons, not seconds. A letter took weeks to arrive. A journey could take months." He paused. "But perhaps that made things more precious. When you couldn't summon someone with a telegram, every visit mattered. Every goodbye felt real." Eleanor moved her bishop, capturing his pawn. "Do you miss it?" "Every night," his smile was wry. "Though I confess, electric light is a significant improvement over candles. And modern medicine, I watched too many die of ailments that would be trivial now." "Like Marianne?" Lucian's hand stilled over his queen. Eleanor held her breath, wondering if she'd pushed too far. But he simply nodded. "Consumption. She was dying when I met her. Months, the doctor said. I thought I was offering her eternity." His voice dropped. "I didn't realize I was condemning her to an eternity of hunger and madness." Eleanor reached across the board, covering his hand with hers. "You couldn't have known. I should have asked more questions." Ensured she understood what the transformation entailed. Lucian turned his hand over, threading his fingers through hers. "Consent isn't just a word, Eleanor. It's sacred. Without it, we're no better than the monsters humans believe us to be." The weight of his words settled between them. Eleanor thought of her marriage, the vows spoken under duress, her father's debts, the way her husband had smiled when she'd signed the contract. "I do." 2 words that had become a cage. "My marriage wasn't consensual either," she said quietly. "Not truly. My father owed money to the Ashfords. I was 17, and my mother had just died, and they said if I married Thomas, the debt would be forgiven." She looked down at their joined hands. "I said yes because I had to, not because I wanted to, and every day after felt like wearing someone else's skin." Lucian's fingers tightened around hers. "Did he never forced himself on me, if that's what you're asking, but he made it clear I was property, an obligation." Eleanor's throat closed. "When Clara was born, I thought it might change things, that he'd see me as more than a broodmare, but he just left. Mistresses, gambling, everything but his wife and daughter. And when I finally gathered the courage to leave, he sent his family after me like I was a runaway dog. If I could," Lucian said softly, "I would find every person who hurt you and teach them the true meaning of fear." Eleanor looked up, startled by the venom in his voice. But his eyes held no cruelty, only a fierce, protective rage that made her heart stutter. "I don't need revenge," she whispered. "I just need to be free. Then I'll make sure you are." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that was feather-light and utterly devastating. "Whatever it takes, Eleanor. You and Clara will be free." The air between them sparked. Eleanor felt it. The pull, the impossible magnetic draw toward this creature who should terrify her, but instead made her feel seen for the first time in years. Slowly, carefully, she rose from her chair and moved around the chess set, kneeling beside him. "Lucian," she breathed. He cupped her face with hands that trembled despite their supernatural strength. "I am damned, Eleanor. I am cold and dead and—" She kissed him. It was tentative at first, a question more than a demand. His lips were cool against hers, but they softened, parted, and then he was kissing her back with a hunger that had nothing to do with blood. His hand slid into her hair, cradling the back of her head, and Eleanor melted into him with a gasp. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucian pressed his forehead to hers. "This is madness," he whispered. "I know. You could die. Ravencross will see you as leverage. I know. And I am so selfish because I cannot let you go." Eleanor smiled against his mouth. "Then don't." They kissed again, and this time it was slower, deeper, a conversation in touches and sighs. Lucian lifted her into his lap as though she weighed nothing, and Eleanor wound her arms around his neck, marveling at the solid strength of him, the way he held her like something precious despite the monster he claimed to be. "I haven't done this in so long," Lucian admitted when they paused for breath. "I've forgotten how to be gentle." "You've been nothing but gentle with me." Eleanor traced the line of his jaw, feeling the tension thrumming beneath his skin. "With Clara, even with that vampire, you could have killed it in seconds, but you sent it away with a warning. Because killing it would have started a war." But his eyes were soft as he looked at her. "And I have something worth protecting now." Eleanor's chest ached. "What happens when the week is over?" "I don't know." Lucian tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "But I know I want you here, both of you, for as long as you'll have me. That could be a very long time. I have nothing but time." His smile was crooked, almost shy. "Though I confess, the idea of watching you age while I remain frozen is difficult." Eleanor's breath caught. "Could I—" "No." The word was firm, almost sharp. Lucian's hands framed her face, his gaze intense. "I will not turn you, Eleanor. Not unless you ask, freely and fully informed, without coercion or fear. And even then," he swallowed, "even then I don't know if I could do it. The risk of creating another Marianne, of condemning you to madness." "I understand." And she did. Though a small, traitorous part of her wondered what it would be like. To be strong, to be free of aging and death, to stand beside him as an equal rather than a fragile mortal under his protection. But Lucian was right. Consent mattered, and she wasn't ready to make that choice. Not yet. Instead, she kissed him again, pouring everything she couldn't say into the press of her lips. "Thank you. I trust you. I see you." They stayed like that for hours, wrapped in each other, the fire burning low. And when Eleanor finally retreated to her room, she found Clara awake, sitting up in bed with wide eyes. "Mama, are you in love with the vampire?" Eleanor froze, heat flooding her cheeks. "Clara, It's okay." Clara smiled, the same bright, fearless smile she'd given Lucian in the garden. "He makes you happy. I can tell." Eleanor sank onto the bed, pulling her daughter close. "He's different and dangerous. But yes, darling, I think I might be." Clara nestled against her mother's side. "Good, I like him, and I think he needs us. Out of the mouths of babes." Eleanor kissed the top of Clara's head and prayed that her daughter's simple wisdom would be enough to see them through whatever came next. Chapter 6. The Siege. They came at dawn. Eleanor woke to the sound of breaking glass, of inhuman shrieks echoing through the manor. She bolted upright, heart hammering, and lunged for Clara. But the bed was empty. No. She tore out of the room, terror clawing at her throat. The hallway was chaos. Vampires in dark cloaks flowing through the upper floors like smoke, their eyes glowing ember red. Eleanor grabbed the silver knife from her skirts and ran toward the stairs. "Clara!" Her scream ripped through the cacophony. "Clara!" A vampire lunged at her from the shadows. Eleanor ducked, slashing upward with the blade. It bit into cold flesh and the creature hissed, recoiling. She didn't wait. She sprinted down the stairs, past overturned furniture, past Lucian's ward smoldering and broken on the floor. The library doors stood open. Inside, Lucian faced down 5 vampires, his back to the hearth. His eyes blazed silver white, his fangs bared, and shadows writhed around him like living things. But even as Eleanor watched, one of the attackers lunged, and Lucian barely parried the blow. He was outnumbered, outmatched. And behind them all, held by a gaunt vampire with a crown of thorns tattooed across his brow, was Clara Eleanor's world narrowed to a single point, her daughter's terrified face. "Let her go," Lucian snarled, and Eleanor had never heard such venom in his voice. "This is between houses. She is innocent. She is leverage." The crowned vampire, Ravencross it had to be, smiled with too many teeth. "Surrender, Thornwood. Swear fealty to my house and the woman and child live." "Never. Then they die." Ravencross's hand tightened on Clara's shoulder, and the child whimpered. Eleanor saw red. She didn't think. Didn't plan. She simply ran. The silver knife flashed in her hand as she barreled into Ravencross. The vampire's eyes went wide. He hadn't seen her, hadn't expected a mortal to be so foolish. Eleanor drove the blade into his ribs with all her strength, feeling it catch, sink, pierce. Ravencross roared. His grip on Clara loosened. Eleanor shoved her daughter away. "Run, Clara, run!" And then the vampire backhanded her across the face. Pain exploded through Eleanor's skull. She hit the floor hard, tasting copper, her vision swimming. Through the haze, she saw Lucien move, faster than thought, faster than death. He tore through the other vampires like a storm, ripping, shattering, until he reached Ravencross. You. Touched. Her. Each word was a sentence. Lucian's hand closed around Ravencross's throat, lifting him off his feet. The crowned vampire clawed at Lucian's arm, but Lucian didn't flinch. His other hand reached for the silver knife still embedded in Ravencross's ribs, and he twisted. Ravencross screamed. "Tell your house," Lucian hissed, his face inches from Ravencross's, "that Eleanor Ashford and her daughter are under the protection of Thornwood. Anyone who touches them answers to me, and I have waited 200 years for an excuse to remind the world what my bloodline was capable of." He wrenched the knife free and threw Ravencross toward the shattered windows. The vampire hit the ground outside, scrambled to his feet, and fled into the dying night. His followers vanished after him like shadows fleeing the sun. Silence crashed down. Lucian stood in the center of the ruined library, chest heaving, eyes still blazing. Then he turned, and the fire in his gaze guttered out. Eleanor. He was beside her in an instant, gathering her into his arms. Eleanor sagged against him, her head throbbing, her body shaking with adrenaline. She could feel his cold hands on her face, checking for injuries, and his voice, ragged, desperate, murmuring her name like a prayer. "I'm all right," she managed. "Clara, I'm here, Mama." Eleanor's eyes flew open. Clara stood in the doorway, unharmed, tears streaming down her cheeks. Eleanor reached for her, and the child threw herself into her mother's arms, sobbing, "Shh, darling. We're safe. We're safe." But Lucian's expression said otherwise. An hour later, Eleanor sat in the library with a cold compress to her bruised cheek, watching Lucian pace. Clara had finally cried herself to sleep in Eleanor's lap, and the silence was heavy with unspoken words. "I nearly lost you," Lucian said finally, his voice hollow. "Both of you. If you hadn't stabbed Ravencross, if I'd been 1 second slower, but you weren't." Eleanor shifted Clara gently, laying the child on the nearby sofa. "We're alive, Lucian, for now." He stopped pacing, his hands curling into fists. "Ravencross will return, with reinforcements. He's humiliated, and vampires don't forgive humiliation. Then we leave. There's nowhere to run. He has allies across Europe, agents in every city." Lucian's gaze was bleak. "The only way you're safe is if I end this, permanently." Eleanor stood, crossing to him. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I challenge him. Formally. A duel to the death, witnessed by the vampire houses. If I win, you and Clara are granted sanctuary under ancient law. If I lose..." He broke off, his jaw tight. "If you lose, we die anyway," Eleanor finished. "So we make sure you win." Lucian stared at her. "You can't be serious. You taught me to fight. You taught me your weaknesses." Eleanor took his hands, ignoring the cold, focusing on the strength beneath. "You're not alone anymore, Lucian. And I am not some fragile damsel who needs to be locked away while you risk everything. Eleanor, if you're there, if he uses you against me, then we plan for that. We prepare." Her grip tightened. "But you don't get to martyr yourself. Not after everything." For a long moment, Lucian said nothing. Then slowly he pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "You are the most stubborn, reckless, extraordinary woman I have ever met," he murmured. Eleanor smiled against his chest. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It is." He pulled back, cupping her face gently. "If we do this, if we face Ravencross together, I need you to promise me something. Anything. If it goes wrong, if I fall, you take Clara and you run. You don't look back. You don't mourn me? His voice cracked. You live, Eleanor. Promise me. Eleanor's throat closed, but she nodded. I promise. It was a lie, and they both knew it. But Lucian kissed her anyway. Soft and desperate and achingly tender. And Eleanor let herself believe, just for a moment, that they might actually survive this. Outside, the sun rose over Thornwood Estate, and in the shadows, Ravencross sharpened his blades and plotted his revenge. Chapter 7. The Challenge. The letter arrived at dusk, sealed in black wax with the sigil of a raven clutching a bloodied crown. Lucian read it in silence, his expression carved from marble. Then he handed it to Eleanor. Lucian Thornwood, you have violated the armistice and sheltered mortals in open defiance of Ravencross sovereignty. For this and for the injury done to my person, I invoke the right of single combat. Meet me at the ruins of Ashcroft Chapel 3 nights hence at the toll of midnight. Bring your human pets if you wish. I shall enjoy making you watch them die before I take your head. Lord Armand Ravencross. Eleanor's hands shook as she lowered the letter. 3 nights. Long enough to prepare, not long enough to flee. Lucian moved to the window, staring out at the darkening grounds. He's chosen Ashcroft Chapel deliberately. It's neutral ground, but the ruins offer a dozen ambush points. He'll have allies hidden in the shadows. Then we bring allies too. Lucian shook his head. I have none. Thornwood died with my family. What about other houses? Surely not all of them support Ravencross. They fear him, and they have no reason to defend me. Lucian's voice was flat. I am the last of a broken line, Eleanor. A cautionary tale. No one will stand with me against a lord with Ravencross's power. Eleanor set the letter aside, her mind racing. 3 nights. 3 nights to turn the tide, to find an advantage, to ensure that when Lucian faced Ravencross, he didn't face him alone. An idea sparked. What if we made them a reason? She said slowly. Lucian turned, his brow furrowing. What do you mean? You said vampire law is built on oaths and witnesses. That a formal duel must be observed by the houses to be binding. Yes. Ravencross will have his allies present to ensure I honor the terms. Then we invite others. Every house we can reach in 3 nights. Eleanor began to pace, her thoughts crystallizing. We make this about more than revenge. We make it about the law Ravencross is breaking. He hasn't broken. He attacked your home without formal challenge. He threatened a mortal child under your protection. And... Eleanor met Lucian's gaze, her heart pounding. He's doing it because he wants your lands. Not for justice, for power, understanding dawned in Lucian's eyes. You want me to expose him. I want you to remind the other houses what happens when a lord becomes a tyrant. They fear Ravencross now. But what's to stop him from turning on them next? Eleanor's voice gained strength. If we frame this duel as a referendum on his rule, they'll come. If only to watch him fall. Lucian stared at her and then, impossibly, he laughed. It was a rough, disbelieving sound, but genuine. You would make a terrifying vampire, Eleanor Ashford. She smiled. Then it's a good thing I'm on your side. They spent the next 2 days writing letters. Eleanor's hand cramped from transcribing Lucian's dictation, formal, archaic phrasing invoking laws she barely understood. But the message was clear. Lucian Thornwood calls upon the ancient houses to witness justice. Come to Ashcroft Chapel and see whether Ravencross honors the old ways, or if he has become the very monster the armistice was designed to prevent. Lucian sent the letters by raven, by messenger, by every clandestine channel he'd maintained over 2 centuries of isolation, and then they waited. On the second night, the replies came. House Draven would attend. House Mordain sent regrets, but promised neutrality. House Lysander, one of the oldest bloodlines, sent a single line. We remember Thornwood. We will bear witness. Eleanor read each response aloud, and with every name, she saw Lucian's shoulders straighten. He was not alone. Not anymore. But the night before the duel, Eleanor found him in the training room, moving through sword forms with mechanical precision. His movements were flawless, lethal, but his eyes were distant. You're afraid, she said softly. Lucian's blade stilled. Yes, of losing. Of failing you. He lowered the sword, turning to face her. If I die tomorrow, Ravencross will come for you and Clara. Witnesses or no witnesses, he'll claim you as spoils of war." Eleanor crossed the room, taking the sword from his hands and setting it aside. "Then don't die. Eleanor, I mean it, Lucian. You are faster, stronger, and smarter than he is. You've survived 2 centuries of grief and isolation. You've rebuilt yourself from nothing." She cupped his face, forcing him to meet her gaze. "And you have something he doesn't." "What's that?" "Something worth living for." Lucian's breath hitched. He pulled her close, and Eleanor felt the tremor running through him. Fear and longing and desperate. Fragile hope all tangled together. "If I survive this," he whispered against her hair, "if we have a future beyond tomorrow night, I want to give you a choice." Eleanor's heart stuttered. What choice? To stay mortal, to grow old, to live a human life, to leave me when the years become too heavy. His hands tightened on her waist. Or to become like me, to take my blood, to bind yourself to the night, to stand beside me as an equal for as long as eternity lasts. Eleanor pulled back, searching his face. "You said you'd never turn someone—" "I said I'd never turn someone without consent, without full knowledge of what they'd become." Lucian's silver eyes were steady, clear. "If you choose this, Eleanor, I will tell you everything. The hunger, the isolation, the things you'll lose and the things you'll gain. And if knowing all of that, you still want eternity, I will give it to you." Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes. "And if I choose mortality, then I will love you until your last breath. And I will remember you long after the world forgets my name." The words broke her. Eleanor kissed him, hard and fierce, pouring every ounce of her heart into it. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, she pressed her forehead to his. "Ask me again," she whispered, "when we've won." Lucian's smile was small but real. "As you wish." They spent that night wrapped in each other, learning the landscape of touch and trust. And when dawn came, Eleanor dressed in black, braided her hair, and tucked the silver knife into her belt. She was ready to fight for her future. Chapter 8. Ashcroft Chapel. The ruins of Ashcroft Chapel rose against the night sky like broken teeth. Eleanor stood beside Lucian at the edge of the clearing, Clara hidden safely at the manor with wards Lucian had spent the entire day reinforcing. Around them, the shadows moved with unnatural life. Vampires from a dozen houses, come to witness the duel. House Lysander's matriarch, a woman with white hair and eyes like black diamonds, inclined her head to Lucian. "Thornwood, it has been too long, Lady Lysander." Lucian returned the gesture with courtly grace. "Thank you for coming. We do not forget our debts. Your great-grandfather once sheltered my house when Ravencross's grandsire sought to destroy us." Her gaze flicked to Eleanor, assessing, "And it seems you have inherited his taste for protecting the vulnerable." Eleanor met the vampire's eyes without flinching. "He's protecting his own, my lady, as any worthy house would." A flicker of approval crossed Lysander's face. Indeed. More vampires emerged from the shadows. Lords and ladies in dark finery, their power crackling in the air like static. Eleanor counted them, 15 in total, not including Ravencross's people. Enough to ensure fairness, or enough to watch Lucian die. At midnight, the chapel bells tolled, a phantom sound, since the bell tower had collapsed decades ago. But the vampires heard it, felt it in their bones, and the clearing fell silent. Ravencross stepped into the moonlight. He wore armor of blackened steel, his crown of thorns gleaming silver. Behind him came a dozen vampires in blood-red cloaks, their faces hidden, and in his hand, he carried a sword that looked forged from shadow itself. "Thornwood," Ravencross called, his voice echoing through the ruins. "You've brought an audience. How theatrical." "I've brought witnesses," Lucian corrected, stepping forward. "As the old laws demand, this duel will be fought under their gaze, bound by the covenant of single combat. Do you agree to the terms?" Ravencross's smile was sharp. "I agree. First blood to prove skill, final blood to prove dominance. The victor claims all, lands, titles, and—" His gaze slid to Eleanor. "Chattel." Eleanor's jaw clenched. but Lucian's voice remained steady. Agreed, with one addition. Oh? If I win, Eleanor Ashford and her daughter are granted sanctuary under the protection of all houses present. No vampire may harm them, turn them, or claim them without their explicit consent. Murmurs rippled through the assembled vampires. Ravencross's smile faltered. You would waste a boon on mortals? I would ensure their safety. Lucian drew his sword, a slender blade of silver-edged steel. Do you accept or do you forfeit the duel? Ravencross's eyes blazed. I accept. And when I take your head, Thornwood, I'll make your pet watch. The signal came from Lady Lysander. A single, sharp clap. The duel began. Ravencross moved first, his shadow sword whistling through the air in a brutal arc. Lucian parried, the clash of blades sending sparks into the night. They circled each other, testing, probing for weaknesses. Eleanor's hands clenched at her sides. She'd seen Lucian fight, swift, precise, efficient. But Ravencross was older, stronger, and he fought with the confidence of someone who'd never lost. The first blood came quickly. Lucian's blade caught Ravencross's shoulder, drawing a thin line of dark ichor. The assembled vampires murmured approval, but Ravencross only laughed. Clever, Thornwood, but first blood means nothing. He surged forward with inhuman speed. Lucian barely dodged, the shadow sword slicing through his coat. They crashed together, grappling, and Eleanor saw Ravencross's fangs flash in the moonlight. He was trying to bite, to drain Lucian mid-fight. That's against the rules, Eleanor shouted, but Lady Lysander raised a hand. There are no rules in Final Blood, the matriarch said coldly. Only survival. Eleanor's heart plummeted. She watched as Lucian twisted free, as Ravencross pressed his advantage, as the two vampires became blurs of motion too fast for mortal eyes to track. Blood, dark and glistening, spattered the ground. Lucian's, Ravencross's. Impossible to tell. Then Ravencross feinted left and drove his blade through Lucian's side. Eleanor screamed. Lucian staggered, his sword clattering to the ground. Ravencross wrenched his blade free and kicked Lucian to his knees. The assembled vampires fell silent. Any last words, Thornwood? Ravencross raised his sword for the killing blow, and Lucian smiled. Just one. He moved. Faster than he'd moved all fight. Faster than Eleanor had ever seen. His hand shot out, grabbing Ravencross's wrist, and he twisted. The shadow sword flew from Ravencross's grip. In the same motion, Lucian surged to his feet, his own blade, retrieved in a blur, finding Ravencross's throat. Yield, Lucian hissed. Ravencross froze. Around them, the vampires leaned forward, eyes glittering. You can't kill me, Ravencross spat. My house. Your house will find a new lord. One who remembers that power without honor is tyranny. Lucian's blade pressed deeper, drawing blood. I offer you mercy, Ravencross. Yield and live in exile. Refuse, and I'll prove to every house here that Thornwood is not broken. Silence. Then, through gritted teeth, I yield. Lucian stepped back, lowering his blade. Ravencross collapsed to his knees, clutching his throat, his eyes blazing with impotent fury. Lady Lysander rose from her seat among the ruins. The duel is concluded. Lucian Thornwood is victorious. By the covenant of single combat, witnessed and bound, I declare Eleanor Ashford and her daughter Clara under the protection of all houses present. So it is sworn. So it is sworn, the other vampires echoed. Eleanor's knees went weak. Lucian crossed the clearing in 3 strides and caught her before she fell, pulling her into his arms. It's over, he murmured. You're safe, both of you. Eleanor clung to him, heedless of the blood soaking his clothes, of the vampires watching, of anything but the solid, impossible fact of his survival. Don't ever do that again, she whispered fiercely. Lucian's laugh was ragged. No promises. The houses departed one by one, melting into shadow. Ravencross was escorted away by his own people, humiliated and powerless. And as the last vampire vanished, leaving only Lucian and Eleanor in the ruins, the chapel bells tolled again, a benediction, or perhaps a warning. What happens now? Eleanor asked. Lucian looked down at her, his silver eyes soft despite the blood and exhaustion. Now we go home. We rebuild, and—" He hesitated, then smiled. "We teach your daughter about rabbits and chess and all the small, precious things I'd forgotten existed." Eleanor's heart swelled. "And after that?" "After that," Lucian said quietly, "I ask you a question, and you give me an answer." She knew what he meant. Mortality or eternity, mortal woman or vampire's equal. But tonight, beneath the ruins of a chapel and the weight of ancient oaths, Eleanor simply kissed him and chose the present. Tomorrow's choices could wait. Chapter 9. The Choice. Spring came to Thornwood Estate. Eleanor stood in the garden, watching Clara chase butterflies through the wild roses. 3 months had passed since the duel. 3 months of rebuilding, of laughter echoing through halls that had known only silence for centuries, of quiet evenings in the library, where Lucian taught Eleanor the intricacies of vampire politics, and she taught him the simple joy of storytelling. But beneath the peace, a question lingered. Lucian had not pressed her, had not mentioned that night at the chapel the promise of choice. But Eleanor felt it in every glance, every careful touch, every moment when he looked at her as though memorizing her face before time stole it away. She was aging. Not quickly. She was still young, barely 30. But in vampire years, a mortal lifetime was a blink, and Eleanor could see the calculation in Lucian's eyes. How many springs do we have? How many summers before I lose her? Clara's laughter rang out, bright and heedless. Eleanor smiled, but her heart ached. "You're thinking too loudly." She turned to find Lucian behind her, his dark coat unbuttoned, his hair ruffled by the breeze. He looked more human than she'd ever seen him, alive almost, in the way he'd allowed himself to relax into this fragile domestic peace. "I was thinking," Eleanor said, "about choices." Lucian's expression grew careful. You offered me one. 3 months ago." Eleanor stepped closer, her pulse quickening. "You said you'd tell me everything. The hunger, the isolation, what I'd lose, and what I'd gain." "I did." "Then tell me now." Eleanor took his hands, cold as always but steady. "Tell me what it means to become like you. I want to know everything, Lucian. No poetry, no metaphors. The truth." For a long moment, Lucian said nothing. Then he led her to a stone bench beneath an oak tree, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet and unflinching. "The transformation takes 3 nights," he began. "I would give you my blood, not a bite, but a full exchange. You'd drink from me until your heart slowed, until you hovered at the edge of death. Then you'd sleep, and in that sleep, your body would remake itself. Bones would strengthen, senses would sharpen. The need for food and water would fade, replaced by a single, overwhelming hunger." Eleanor listened, her hands folded in her lap. "When you wake on the 3rd night, that hunger will consume you. You'll need to feed. Fresh blood, preferably human, though animal will suffice if you're strong enough to resist the pull. I'll be there to guide you, to ensure you don't lose yourself to the bloodlust. But Eleanor—" He turned to face her fully. "There's no guarantee. Some people wake and retain their humanity. Others become ghouls, mindless and ravenous. The difference is consent. True soul-deep consent. If any part of you resists, if you're turned against your will or under duress, the transformation fails." "Like Marianne," Eleanor whispered. "Like Marianne." Lucian's jaw tightened. "I thought she wanted eternity. But what she wanted was to escape death, not to embrace what comes after. And that distinction mattered. It always matters." Eleanor absorbed this, her mind racing. "And if the transformation succeeds, then you'll be vampire. Immortal, barring violence or starvation. You'll heal from almost any wound. You'll be stronger, faster, sharper than any mortal. But," his voice dropped, "you'll never see sunlight again. Never taste food or wine. Never grow old. Never have more children. Never die a natural death." "And the loneliness?" Eleanor asked. "You've lived 200 years in isolation. Would I face that too? Only if I died." Lucian's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "If you choose this, Eleanor, you choose me. We would be bound, blood to blood, life to endless life. I would teach you to navigate our world, to to defend yourself against rival houses, to find joy in the small eternities. He paused. But I cannot promise you happiness. Only partnership. Eleanor's throat closed. And if I choose mortality? Then I will love you until your last breath, Lucian said simply. I'll protect you and Clara for as long as you'll have me. And when you're gone, I'll mourn you. But I'll remember, Eleanor, that you gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. What's that? Hope. The word hung in the air, fragile and luminous. Eleanor looked at him. This ancient, broken, achingly gentle creature who'd learned to smile because a child wasn't afraid, and felt the weight of her choice settle into her bones. She could stay mortal. Grow old with Clara, see her daughter marry and have children of her own, live a human life, full and finite and safe. Or she could step into the darkness, become something more and less than human, tied to Lucian for eternity, navigating a world of blood oaths and ancient feuds. If I choose eternity, Eleanor said slowly. Could Clara... No. Lucian's voice was firm. She's a child. She cannot consent. If she chooses this when she's grown, when she understands what it means, I'll consider it. But not before. Eleanor nodded. It was the answer she'd expected. The answer she needed. Lucian understood consent in a way her husband never had, in a way that made her trust him with the most irrevocable choice of her life. I need time, she whispered. To think, to be sure. Take all the time you need. Lucian lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. I'm not going anywhere. But even as he said it, Eleanor saw the shadow in his eyes, the fear that she'd choose mortality, that he'd have to watch her age and fade while he remained frozen in this moment forever. She didn't have an answer yet, but she knew, with sudden clarity, that whatever she chose would shape not just her future, Boothus, and she owed them both the courage to choose honestly. That night, Eleanor tucked Clara into bed and sat on the edge of the mattress, smoothing her daughter's hair. Mama, you look sad, Clara said, her eyes, so like Eleanor's own, wide and searching. Not sad, darling, just thinking. About Mr. Thornwood? Eleanor's lips curved despite herself. Clara had taken to calling Lucian Mr. Thornwood with the solemnity of a child navigating adult complexities. Yes, about him. Clara was quiet for a moment, then sat up, her small face serious. Do you love him? I do. Does he love you? Yes, I think he does. Then what's wrong? Clara tilted her head, so achingly innocent. When people love each other, they should be together. That's what the stories say. Eleanor pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of soap and childhood. The stories don't tell you that sometimes being together means making very hard choices. Choices that change everything. Like leaving Papa? The question caught Eleanor off guard. She pulled back to look at Clara, whose expression was far too knowing for 6 years old. You were brave when you left, Clara continued. You were scared, but you did it anyway, because staying would have been worse. She reached out, her small hand patting Eleanor's cheek. Maybe this is like that too. Maybe the hard choice is the right one. Out of the mouths of babes indeed. Eleanor kissed her daughter's forehead, her eyes stinging. When did you get so wise? Mr. Thornwood says I ask good questions. Clara snuggled back under the covers, yawning. And you taught me to be brave, so I think you should be brave too, Mama. Eleanor stayed until Clara's breathing evened into sleep, then rose and made her way through the darkened hallways. Not to her room, not to the library, to the chapel. Thornwood Estate had a small chapel in the east wing, long abandoned but still intact. Eleanor pushed open the heavy doors and found Lucian standing before the altar, staring up at a stained glass window depicting St. Michael casting down the devil. I've always found this ironic, he said without turning. A monster seeking sanctuary in a house of God. Eleanor moved to stand beside him. Do you believe in God? I believe in something beyond myself, whether it grants redemption to creatures like me. He shrugged. I've stopped asking. But you hope. I always hope. Lucian's gaze remained fixed on the window. It's the curse of the undying. We live long enough to see every certainty proven false. But hope persists, no matter how many times it's crushed. Eleanor reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "I've made my choice." Lucian went still. Slowly he turned to face her, and the vulnerability in his expression was breathtaking. "Tell me," he whispered. Eleanor took a breath, feeling the weight of the moment, the hinge on which her entire future pivoted. "I choose eternity. I choose you, not because I'm afraid of death, or because I'm running from my past, but because—" her voice shook. "Because for the first time in my life, I want to run toward something, toward a future where I'm not property or obligation, where I'm partner and equal, where I can stand beside you and face whatever comes without fear." Lucian's eyes blazed silver. "Eleanor, are you certain? If you have even a shadow of doubt—" "I have doubts," she admitted. "I'm terrified of the hunger, of losing myself, of what eternity means. But I'm more terrified of growing old and leaving you alone again, of dying knowing I could have had forever and chose safety instead." She cupped his face in both hands. "You asked me once what I wanted. This is it, Lucian. I want to live, truly live, and I want to do it with you." For a moment, Lucian simply stared at her. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I will make you this promise," he said fiercely against her hair. "I will guide you through every step. I will not let you become lost. And if the transformation fails, if you wake as something mindless, I will end it quickly and mourn you for the rest of eternity. It won't fail." Eleanor pulled back to meet his gaze. "I consent, Lucian. Freely. Fully. I want this." Lucian searched her eyes, and whatever he saw there must have convinced him, because he nodded once, sharply. "Then we begin tomorrow night. I'll need to prepare, gather supplies, strengthen the wards. The transformation is vulnerable. We'll be at our weakest for 3 days." His hands framed her face, his touch reverent. "Are you ready to say goodbye to the sun?" Eleanor thought of all the dawns she'd watched, hollow-eyed and hopeless in her marriage, of all the days that had blurred, together into a gray monotone of survival. "I already have," she said, and when Lucian kissed, her deep and claiming, and full of desperate promise, Eleanor knew she'd made the right choice. Tomorrow, she would die. But 3 nights from now, she would wake reborn. Chapter 10. Eternity Begins. The transformation chamber was deep beneath Thornwood Estate, in catacombs Eleanor had never seen. Lucian led her down stone steps worn smooth by centuries, past alcoves filled with bones and dust, until they reached a circular room lit by hundreds of candles. In the center stood a stone altar draped in black velvet, and around it, Lucian had drawn intricate symbols in salt and silver. "Protective wards," he explained, his voice echoing in the vaulted space, "to ensure no one disturbs us during the 3 nights. Not Ravencross's remnants, not rival houses, not anything." Eleanor nodded, her heart hammering. She'd left Clara in the care of Mrs. Hartley, the village woman Lucian had hired to serve as governess and protector, while Eleanor underwent the transformation. Clara had cried, but Eleanor had promised she'd return. Different, but still her mother. She prayed it was a promise she could keep. "Are you ready?" Lucian asked, and Eleanor heard the tremor beneath his calm. "Yes." He guided her to the altar, helping her lie back against the velvet. The stone was cold beneath her, but Lucian's hand in hers was steady. He knelt beside her, and in the candlelight, his face was all sharp angles and ancient sorrow. "This will hurt," he said quietly. "When my blood enters your veins, your body will fight it. You'll feel like you're burning from the inside out. But you must drink, Eleanor. You must take enough to replace what you lose." "I understand." Lucian withdrew a silver dagger from his coat. "I'll cut my wrist first. When I offer it to you, drink until I tell you to stop. Then," he swallowed, "then I'll take from you. I'll drain you to the edge of death, but not beyond. Do you trust me?" Eleanor met his eyes. "With my life, with my soul." Something in Lucian's expression cracked. He leaned down, pressing his forehead to hers. I love you, Eleanor Ashford. In all my centuries, I have never said those words and meant them as I do now. I love you too, Eleanor whispered. And then Lucian drew the blade across his wrist. Dark blood welled. Not red, but deeper, almost black in the candlelight. He held his wrist to Eleanor's lips, and she hesitated for only a heartbeat before she drank. The taste was copper and earth and something indefinable, ancient, potent, wild. It burned down her throat, and Eleanor gasped, but Lucian's other hand cradled her head, gentle and firm. Keep drinking, he urged. Just a little more. Eleanor obeyed, feeling the blood spread through her like liquid fire. Her vision blurred. Her heart raced, then stuttered, then raced again. And still she drank, until Lucian finally pulled his wrist away. Enough, he said, his voice rough. Now comes the hard part. He bent to her throat, and Eleanor tilted her head, baring the pulse beneath her skin. For a moment, Lucian simply breathed against her neck, his lips cold and soft. Then his fangs pierced flesh. Pain lanced through her, sharp and bright and utterly consuming. Eleanor cried out, but Lucian's arm banded around her, holding her steady as he drank. She could feel it, her blood leaving her body, her strength draining, her vision dimming at the edges. Too much, she thought wildly. He's taking too much, but just as darkness closed in, Lucian pulled away. His mouth was stained with her blood, his eyes blazing with something between hunger and horror. He pressed his hand to her throat, and Eleanor felt the wound close beneath his touch. Vampire blood, already working to heal her. Sleep now, Lucian whispered, lowering her fully onto the altar. Sleep and let the change take you. Eleanor's eyes fluttered closed. The last thing she saw was Lucian settling beside the altar, his vigil begun. Then the darkness swallowed her whole. The first night. Eleanor dreamed of fire. Her body burned, every nerve alight with agony. She tried to scream, but no sound came. In the dream, she stood at the edge of a vast abyss, and on the other side, a figure beckoned, Lucian, or something wearing his face. Come, the figure whispered. Cross over. Become. But between Eleanor and the figure stretched a bridge made of thorns and broken glass. To cross meant pain. To stay meant safety. But also solitude. The slow death of remaining unchanged. Eleanor stepped onto the bridge. The thorns tore at her feet. The glass shredded her palms. But she kept moving. One step. Another. The figure, Lucian, watched with those silver eyes, and Eleanor could see the fear in them. The terrible, fragile hope that she would make it across. She would not fail him. She would not fail herself. With the last of her strength, Eleanor lunged forward and fell into Lucian's waiting arms. The dream shattered. The second night, hunger. That was all Eleanor knew when she surfaced from the darkness. Hunger so profound it eclipsed thought, eclipsed self. She was aware of a heartbeat nearby, slow, steady, alive. Pray. No, something in her whispered. Not pray, Lucian, but the hunger didn't care. It urged her to move, to hunt, to feed. Eleanor's eyes snapped open, and the world was sharp, too sharp, every detail rendered in crystalline clarity. She could see the individual flames of 1,000 candles, smell the salt of the wards, hear the whisper of Lucian's breath, despite his lack of true breathing. And she could smell his blood. Eleanor lunged. Lucian caught her wrists, his strength the only thing keeping her from his throat. Eleanor, listen to me. This is the bloodlust. You must fight it. Hungry, Eleanor snarled, and her voice was wrong, deeper, edged with inhuman resonance. I know. I'll feed you, I promise, but not from me. Lucian's grip tightened, his eyes boring into hers. Look at me, Eleanor. Remember who you are. Remember why you chose this. Images flickered through Eleanor's mind. Clara's laugh. The library's warmth. Lucian's smile, rare and precious. The choice she'd made. Not from fear, but from love. The hunger receded a fraction. Good, Lucian breathed. Hold on to that. Hold on to yourself. He released one of her wrists, and Eleanor heard a sound. The bleat of an animal being led into the chamber. A goat, its eyes rolling with fear. Feed, Lucian commanded. Take what you need. Eleanor fell on the creature with a savagery that would have horrified her mortal self. But the blood was sustenance, was relief, was the only thing standing between her and madness. She drank until the goat went still, until the hunger dulled to a manageable ache. When she finally pulled away, her mouth slick with blood, Lucian was watching her with something like pride. You held on, he said softly. You didn't lose yourself. Eleanor collapsed against the altar, trembling. It's so strong. The need, I know. But you're stronger. Lucian wiped the blood from her chin with gentle fingers. Sleep now. One more night, and the transformation will be complete. Eleanor let the darkness take her again. But this time, she wasn't afraid. She was becoming. The third night, Eleanor woke to silence. Not the absence of sound, but the deep waiting quiet of the world between breaths. She sat up slowly, her body moving with a fluid grace she'd never possessed in life. Every sense was heightened. She could hear mice skittering in the walls above, smell the rain gathering miles away, see every mote of dust dancing in the candlelight, and she felt complete. The hunger was still there, but controlled now, a manageable part of her rather than a consuming force. Eleanor examined her hands, paler than before, the veins standing out like rivers beneath marble, and felt a surge of wonder. How do you feel? She turned to find Lucian watching from the shadows, his expression cautious. Alive, Eleanor said, and laughed at the irony. More alive than I ever was as a mortal. Lucian's shoulders sagged with relief. He crossed to her in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms. You did it. You survived. I was so afraid. I know. Eleanor buried her face in his chest, marveling at how she could hear the stillness where his heart should beat. But I'm here. I'm myself, and I'm yours. Forever, Lucian whispered. Forever, Eleanor agreed. They stayed like that for a long moment, 2 immortals wrapped in candlelight and the weight of eternity. Then Eleanor pulled back, a thought occurring to her. Clara. I need to see Clara. Tomorrow night. She's safe, I promise, but Lucian hesitated. You should feed again first. Ensure you have control before you see her. The scent of mortal blood, especially someone you love. Eleanor nodded, understanding. Then we hunt tonight, and tomorrow, I go to my daughter as what I've become. Lucian smiled, that real, unguarded smile that still stole Eleanor's breath. As you command, Lady Thornwood. The title sent a thrill through her. Eleanor Ashford was dead. In her place stood Eleanor Thornwood, vampire, partner, equal, and she had forever to explore what that meant. Epilogue. 5 years later, Clara was 11 years old when she asked the question, Mama, will you turn me when I'm grown? They were in the garden, still wild, still beautiful, though Eleanor had added night-blooming flowers that glowed silver in the moonlight. Clara sat on the stone bench, her legs swinging, while Eleanor tended to the roses. Eleanor paused, her hands stilling on the thorns that no longer pricked her skin. That's a very serious question, darling. I know. Clara's voice was solemn. But I've been thinking. You and Father. She'd taken to calling Lucian Father, and the title made him smile every time. You'll live forever. And I'll grow old and die. I don't want to leave you. Eleanor set down her shears and knelt before her daughter, taking Clara's hands in her own cold ones. You're 11, Clara. Far too young to make that choice. But when I'm older, when you're older, if you still want this, we'll discuss it. Your father and I will tell you everything. The truth of what it means to be vampire. The hunger. The isolation. The eternity of it. And if, knowing all of that, you choose to join us. Eleanor smiled. Then we'll welcome you gladly. Clara's eyes, so bright, so human, searched her mother's face. Do you regret it? Becoming like him? Never, Eleanor said without hesitation. This life isn't easy, but it's mine. I chose it freely, and I would choose it again 1,000 times over. Then I'll choose it too, Clara declared. When I'm old enough. Eleanor pulled her daughter close, breathing in the mortal warmth of her. We'll see, my darling. We'll see. Later that night, after Clara had gone to bed under Mrs. Hartley's watchful eye, Eleanor found Lucian in the library. He looked up from his book as she entered, and the love in his eyes, still, after 5 years, after eternity, made her heart sing. Clara asked about turning, Eleanor said, settling into her chair. Lucian set down his book. And what did you tell her? That when she's old enough to understand, to truly consent, we'll consider it. Eleanor reached for his hand. Was that right? It was perfect. Lucian pulled her into his lap, wrapping his arms around her. You're a good mother, Eleanor. Mortal or vampire. Eleanor leaned back against him, marveling at how natural this felt. How right. Do you think she'll choose it? When the time comes? I don't know. But whatever she chooses, we'll support her. Lucian pressed a kiss to her temple. That's what family does. Family. The word settled around Eleanor like a benediction. She had a family now, not the cage of her marriage, but a true family built on love and choice, and the fierce determination to protect one another. I love you, she whispered. And I love you, Lucian replied, for all the centuries yet to come. Outside, the moon rose over Thornwood Estate, and in the garden, the night-blooming flowers opened their petals to the dark. Somewhere in the distance, a little girl slept peacefully, dreaming of the choice she would one day make, and in the library, 2 vampires held each other close and watched the candles burn, grateful for the eternity they had found in each other's arms. The story of the cursed vampire who learned to smile was complete, but their forever had only just begun.